The Volvo P1800, the Saints car that drove 3 million miles. There are cars that become famous because they're fast. There are cars that become famous because they're expensive. And then there are cars that become famous because they somehow become part of a legend. This is one of those cars, a Swedish coupe with Italian-inspired lines, British television fame, and one of the most unbelievable ownership stories in motoring history. This is the Volvo P1800. The car driven by Roger Moore in the Saint, and the car that proved reliability wasn't just a marketing slogan by clocking up more than 3 million miles in the hands of one very determined owner. But the story of the P1800 isn't just about mileage. It's about image, it's about reinvention, and it's about Volvo trying to prove to the world that sensible could also be stylish. For decades, Volvo had built its reputation on strength, durability and sensible engineering. The cars were solid, they were dependable, they were trusted. Glamorous? Not really. Volvo was respected, but it wasn't exactly the name you associated with film stars, sports cars and sweeping coastal roads. By the late 1950s, Volvo wanted something different, something that could change how people saw the brand. They didn't just want another family saloon, they wanted a grand touring coupe. A car that still had Volvo's mechanical toughness underneath, but with enough style to make people stop and look. The result would become one of the most beautiful cars Volvo ever made. Well, I can't think of a car that Volvo have made. I love Volvos. I can't think of another one that could hold a candle to the P1800. Volvo's own history records that the P1800 was launched in 1961 using the new B18 engine in a sportier 100 horsepower tune, and that it later gained worldwide recognition thanks to Roger Moore and the Saint. You'd be forgiven for thinking the P1800 was designed in Italy. It has that look: long bonnet, low roofline, slim pillars, beautiful rear fins, a delicate chrome grille. It looks more like something from a Turin design studio than a cold, practical Swedish manufacturer. And there's a reason for that. The design was connected to the Italian design house Frua, but the man behind the shape was Pelle Peterson, a young Swedish designer working under Pietro Frua. For years, the full credit for Peterson's role was not widely acknowledged, but today the P1800 is rightly seen as one of the great pieces of Swedish automotive design with Italian influence. It wasn't a brutal sports car. It wasn't trying to be a Ferrari. It was more refined than that. The P1800 was a gentleman's coupe, a car for long journeys, smart clothes, winding roads, and people who wanted style without sacrificing durability. And that's important because underneath the elegant bodywork, the P1800 was still very much a Volvo. It shared mechanical DNA with Volvo's Amazon range. That meant strong engines, tough running gear, and the kind of engineering that would later make one particular P1800 world famous. The early P1800s were actually built in Britain by Jensen. Yes, the same Jensen associated with the Interceptor. Volvo didn't initially have enough production capacity in Sweden, so the early cars were assembled in West Bromwich, but this part of the story was not entirely smooth. Volvo had very high standards, and the early British built cars didn't always meet them. Eventually, production was moved back to Sweden, and the car became known as the 1800S, the S standing for Sweden. That move helped cement the car's reputation. The P1800 wasn't just a pretty coupe anymore. It was now built with the quality control Volvo wanted, and as the 1960s unfolded, the car was about to get the kind of advertising no manufacturer could buy. In 1962, British television audiences were introduced to Simon Templar, better known as the Saint. He was smooth, he was clever, he was charming, and he was played by Roger Moore. But every television hero needs the right car. James Bond would have the Aston Martin, Steve McQueen would have the Mustang, and Simon Templar had the Volvo P1800. The white P1800 became one of the most recognisable television cars of the 1960s. It perfectly suited Roger Moore's screen image. Not too loud, not too obvious, not too vulgar, just stylish, clean, elegant and quietly confident. Volvo supplied P1800 models for use in the Saint, and enthusiast records note that the series used several cars over the production run, including the famous white examples associated with Moore's Simon Templar. As a little footnote story, the original Volvo in the Saint was supplied by Volvo for the show, but Roger Moore liked it so much he bought one himself, and one of the later cars used in the Saint actually belonged to Roger Moore. And here's the key point: the Saint didn't make the P1800 a good car. It was already a good car. What the Saint did was make the world notice. Suddenly Volvo wasn't just the maker of sensible Scandinavian cars. Volvo had a screen icon. And Roger Moore did something very important for Volvo's image. He made the P1800 cool. The genius of the P1800 was that it was stylish without looking desperate. Some sports cars shout. The P1800 speaks calmly. It doesn't arrive sideways in a cloud of tyre smoke. It glides in. That suited Roger Moore's character perfectly. The car had the same personality as his version of Simon Templar. Elegant, controlled, a little mysterious, a little smug maybe, but in the best possible way. It had enough glamour to look exciting, but enough restraint to look intelligent. And that's why the image still works today. A white Volvo P1800 with Roger Moore behind the wheel is not just a car scene, it's 1960s television style captured in metal. When the Saint came out on TV and the Corgi or Matchbox toy was produced, the day it was produced, not that I was a spoilt little brat, but my dad took me virtually all over Manchester, to all the toy shops all over Manchester, trying to get this model of the Saint's car. And it was sold out. Everywhere was sold out. They'd all gone already. And then on the way back, there was one toy shop on a side street in Peel Green. And we went in and they had one left. So I was a happy little Barry. Loved that car. I love that model. It was beautiful. And I went to a car show the other week and there was two of them there. They're absolutely gorgeous. I'd love one. I really would. The P1800 was never about outrageous performance. It wasn't the point. It was a touring car. A car you could actually use. Early versions used Volvo's B18 engine. Later cars received the B20 engine. There were carburettor versions, fuel-injected versions, and eventually the elegant 1800 ES shooting brake with that beautiful glass tailgate. We actually had one of those at a garage years and years ago, and believe it or not, it had a record player in. Under the glove box, there was a record player for 45s. It's the only vehicle I have ever seen a record player in, but it was in that. The colour of the car was, well, it left a lot to be desired. It was like a flipping yellowy green, but just lovely to drive. The P1800 was produced from the early 1960s into the early 1970s, and over time it evolved from the original P1800 into the 1800S, then the 1800E, and finally the 1800ES. The 1800ES in particular has become a design icon in its own right. Part coupe, part estate, part shooting brake. A car that looked years ahead of its time. But while the Saint gave the P1800 glamour, another story gave it immortality. And that story begins not in Sweden, not in Britain, but in Long Island, New York. In 1966, a school teacher named Irv Gordon bought a red Volvo P1800S. It wasn't bought as an investment. It wasn't bought to sit in a collection. It was bought to be driven, and driven, and driven, and then driven some more. Irv Gordon became one of the most famous car owners in the world because he did something almost nobody else has done. He kept the same car, maintained it properly, and used it relentlessly. Volvo records that Gordon bought his 1800S in April 1966 and that by driving it over 5 million kilometres, more than 3 million miles, he and the car set a world record in 2013. Think about that, 3 million miles. That's not just high mileage, that's to a different universe. Most cars are considered tired at 150,000 miles. Some are considered heroic at 300,000 miles. 500,000 miles is extraordinary. 1,000,000 miles is legendary. 3 million. It's almost absurd. It's the kind of number that sounds made up until you realise it was officially recognised. Volvo later described Irv Gordon as still holding the world record for the most miles driven in a single car by one owner, with more than 3.2 million miles recorded before his death in 2018. Now this is the bit everybody wants to know. How does a car do 3 million miles? Was it magic? Was the P1800 indestructible? Was Irv Gordon just incredibly lucky? The answer is probably a mixture of Volvo engineering, obsessive maintenance, and one owner who genuinely understood his car. Gordon followed the service schedule. He changed the oil regularly. He listened to the car. He didn't treat maintenance as an optional extra. And that's the lesson. The 3 million mile P1800 wasn't a neglected car that somehow survived abuse. It was the opposite. It was proof of what can happen when good engineering meets proper care. That's a very different message from modern throwaway motoring. EVs today, oh, they don't need servicing. Rubbish! Today, people often treat cars like disposable technology. Use it, finance it, forget it, replace it. But Irv Gordon's Volvo tells a different story. It says a car can become a companion, a witness to your life, something that's there on all the good occasions and sadly all the bad ones. A machine that carries memories, not just mileage. Life and death. The human side of the story. What makes Irv Gordon's story so powerful is that it wasn't just about numbers. It was about attachment. This wasn't a man trying to prove a point in a laboratory. He just loved driving. He loved the car. And every mile added to the story. Imagine the things that Volvo saw. Decades of American roads. Changing petrol prices, changing presidents, changing technology, the rise of the internet, the death of the cassette tape, the smartphone era, and still the red P1800 kept going. There's something deeply romantic about that. Not in a sentimental way, in a proper motoring way. A man, a machine, and the open road. The sort of story manufacturers would kill for, because you can't fake it. You can't invent credibility like that. You have to earn it mile after mile after mile. Now there's an important point here. Irv Gordon sadly died in 2018. So the car's no longer racking up miles with him behind the wheel, but the car itself still survives. The famous 1800S is now part of Volvo's heritage story and is displayed at World of Volvo, according to World of Volvo's own history of the model. So when people say the car's still going, the real meaning is this: the legend's still going, the car still exists, the record still stands as part of Volvo history, and the P1800S reputation for durability is still being talked about decades after production ended. That's arguably even more impressive, because lots of cars are famous for a moment, very few are famous for a lifetime. The Volvo P1800 occupies a very unusual place in car history. It's not the fastest, it's not the rarest, it's not the most expensive, as I always say, but it has something many cars never achieve: character. It changed how people saw Volvo. It gave the brand glamour. It put a Swedish coupe on television screens around the world. And then years later, it became the poster child for automotive longevity. That's a remarkable double act. The same model that looked cool enough for Roger Moore also proved tough enough to cross the 3 million mile mark. That combination is almost impossible to replicate. Style and substance, beauty and durability, television fame and real world proof. In today's car world, we're surrounded by huge screens, software updates, battery percentages, finance deals and complicated technology. Cars are faster than ever, safer than ever, more efficient than ever. But are they more loved? The Volvo P1800 reminds us of something important. A great car is not just a spec sheet. It's not just horsepower. It's not just a monthly payment. A great car is one that people remember. one that becomes part of culture, and one that owners bond with. One that has stories attached to it, and the P1800 has some of the best stories of all. Roger Moore made it famous, Irv Gordon made it immortal, and Volvo accidentally created one of the most charming, elegant and enduring coupes of the 20th century. So the next time someone says Volvo only makes sensible cars, show them the P1800, show them the long bonnet, the chrome, the curves, the Saint connection, and then tell them about the red one. The one bought by a school teacher in 1966, the one that drove more than 3 million miles, the one that turned reliability into legend, because the Volvo P1800 wasn't just a pretty face, it wasn't just a television prop, it wasn't just another classic coupe, it was the car that made Volvo stylish and then proved that style could last for millions of miles. This was the Volvo P1800. The Saints car, the 3 million mile legend. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye bye.